Hello, everybody. This is Bruce from Oregon. It's the Bruce from Oregon show. This is episode 0. It might be the first. It might be the last. I don't know. But we have some moose, so it's all good. Today, we're doing another edition of the management series, Management Best Known Practices, Management BKMs. And the topic I want to talk about today is I want to go over logic a little bit. Now, logic is not something that is directly tied to managing employees, managing work, scheduling work, following a product life cycle, all that stuff you do day to day on your job. However, I think having a fundamental sort of introduction to the concepts in logic can be useful when thinking about any kind of situation we might find ourselves in, where we're trying to figure out the best course of action, if someone's telling the truth, what kind of information we might want to go after in order to make a good decision in life, these sorts of things. So that's what we're going to do today. Hopefully it'll be a short video. I'm just going to go over a very few basic things, and you can go off and do further research if you want to get more in depth in these topics about logic. But let's start it off. What I want to do first is go over the 3 traditional laws of logic, or laws of thought, that began with Plato and proceeded through Aristotle. Now, if you go take some college classes on the philosophy department, whether that's logic or ethics or something like that, you will probably be introduced to some of the concepts that these folks, Plato and Aristotle, were thinking about at the time that they were active and doing their work. So it's very interesting. So I just wanted to mention that. Now, the 3 traditional laws of thought are broken down into the law of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. And we're going to go through these one at a time, and I'll explain what each one is. And then at the end, I'm going to go through 2 examples of propositional logic that we can use to figure out, if an argument sounds valid or not. Now, let's get started. So we're going to start with the law of identity. This one's very straightforward. So in logic, the law of identity states that each thing is identical with itself. Okay, it is the first of the historical 3 laws of thought. So the example here is Bruce from Oregon is Bruce from Oregon. Bruce from Oregon is not someone else. Okay, Dave Neal, stand-up comic and podcaster, is Dave Neal. He's not someone else. Dave is not Bruce. Bruce is not Dave. Bruce is Bruce. Dave is Dave. This is very straightforward. So this is the law of identity. It's just saying we can identify individual things. All right, let's go to the second one. The second one is the law of non-contradiction. In logic, the law of non-contradiction, or the principle of contradiction, states that the contradictory prepositions cannot both be true in the same sense at the same time. Okay, what does this mean? So really, the example they give here is the 2 propositions. P is the case, or P is true, and P is not the case, or P is false, are mutually exclusive. Okay? So, Bruce is recording a video, and Bruce is not recording a video. These cannot be true at the same time. Okay? They can be true at different points in time, but not at the same time, not in the same sense. Okay, I'm either recording a video or I'm not. Okay, so that's the law of non-contradiction. Let's go to the 3rd law of thought, the law of excluded middle. In logic, the law of excluded middle, or the principle of excluded middle, states that for every proposition, either the proposition or its negation is true. It is one of the 3 laws of thought. Okay, now, what this is saying is if we have a very specific claim, it is going to either be true or not true. So, for example, Bruce is either recording a video now or Bruce is not recording a video now. One of those 2 things will be true. Now, the interesting thing with this is we have to be very careful about the fallacy of the excluded middle, because if we do not phrase our claims very specifically, to the point where we can say, well, yes, something is either true or not. If I have a jar of marbles, the jar of marbles either has an even number of marbles in it or an odd number of marbles. So if we think about those two things, the jar has an even number of marbles, the jar has an odd number of marbles. Each one of those claims is either true or it's false. However, we have to be very careful in what we're talking about. So, for example, if the jar can have broken marbles, half marbles, then maybe it's not odd or even. There's some, non-integer number of marbles, 3.5. Okay. So the fallacy of the excluded middle, let's go over here. I don't know what I just did there, but this is a false dilemma. It's saying it's a fallacy that if you erroneously limit what options are available, then you are making a fallacy. So, for example, if I say, well, here's a jar full of marbles, there's got to be either an even integer or an odd integer number of marbles in the jar. This is true if we say, well, none of the marbles are broken. Now, once we introduce like half marbles, now the idea that there's an even or odd integer number of marbles in the jar could be wrong. So we don't want to make an argument that limits the options available. Okay, so if I say there's a beverage and, I like, to have a beverage. I like to have a beer or a glass of wine. And I had a beer, therefore I didn't have a glass of wine. Well, that's fine. But if I say, well, okay, there's beer and wine. I didn't have any wine, therefore I must have had a beer. Okay, well, what if I had water? What if I had, whiskey or something? Like there are multiple options sometimes. So depending upon how the argument is made, there could be more than one option in a choice. This is very separate than taking each of those options and making specific claims about them that is in accordance with the law of non-contradiction. Okay? So for each beverage type that we can enumerate, maybe I either had that beverage yesterday or I didn't have that beverage yesterday. And that's fine. So we have to think about the arguments we're making, how many options are there, and how specific are we in the arguments we're making? Because that will determine whether or not we may fall into the trap of the false dilemma fallacy. Okay. So now that we understand the three fundamental laws of thought, law of identity, I am me, Dave is Dave, Dave's not me, I'm not Dave. The law of non-contradiction, okay? I'm either making a video or I'm not making a video. And then the, I think I lost it, law of excluded middle, right? Okay. If the claim is Bruce is making a video, that's either true or false. If Bruce is making a video right now, true or false? It's true. Okay. So once we build up some prepositional logic, we can start doing interesting things with it. And I'm going to show you the form of some of these arguments. The first one, this is sort of a Latin term, but it's modus ponens, okay, or MP. And what we've done is we've taken the three fundamental laws of thought, and we've done a whole bunch of work that I glossed over, and we're getting to what we call propositional logic, which means we can do something interesting with our logic now. Modus ponens is basically saying it is a deductive argument form of the rule of inference, and it's forward reasoning. Okay, so there's going to be a reason. We call it forward reasoning, pun intended. So the way this is written out typically is P implies Q. This is something we know. And then P is true. Therefore, Q must also be true. That is what we're going to deduce. So we know that P implies Q. We know that P is true. So what we can deduce is that Q is also true. Now let's see a real world example down here that they have. So they say, if today is Tuesday, then John will go to work. Okay, so if A, then B, or if P, then Q. And then we know that today is Tuesday, so we can deduce that John will go to work. Okay, now, of course, they say this argument is valid, but has no bearing on whether any of the statements are actually true. So when they say that, what they mean is this argument, the language we're inserting, in the variables P and Q, they all work together. So if A, then B, we assume A is true, therefore we can assume B is true. Now the problem is, if any of these are false, like, well, someone says, oh, today's Tuesday, but it's really Saturday, John won't be at work because today's not really Tuesday. So you have to be careful. Step one is making sure that your argument is valid. Does it fit the form? Okay, if P, then Q. We know P is true, therefore Q. And then we check our evidence to see if the argument is sound. Okay, does John agree that he'll always go to work on Tuesday? Are there any conditions? Maybe he's taking a vacation or something like that. Is today even Tuesday? I don't know. So we want to check the truthfulness of all these claims. But in general, we can create a valid argument of this form by following the if P then Q, we know P, therefore Q structure of modus ponens. So this is interesting. The other thing I wanted to mention about this, in this sort of structure, if we say, okay, P implies Q, but we don't know that P is true, maybe P is false, then we don't know anything about Q. Sometimes somebody might say, oh, well, if P is false, then Q must be false. But that's not correct. Let's use an example from like the TV show The Bachelor. The Bachelor is filmed at the Bachelor Mansion. Now, let's say it's raining at the Bachelor Mansion. So that's going to be our P term here. If it's raining at the Bachelor Mansion, that implies the Bachelor Mansion driveway will be wet. And that's our Q term. Okay. Now, if we know that it's raining at the Bachelor Mansion, we can deduce that the Bachelor Mansion driveway is also wet. So that's great. Now, the problem happens when we say, what if P is false? So we know it's not raining at the Bachelor Mansion. Can we deduce that the driveway is not wet? No, we cannot, because it could have become wet some other way. Somebody could have gone out there with a hose and sprayed it down. Looking at you, Dave Neal. In any case, all we can do is follow the forward reasoning here, okay? P implies Q, P is true, therefore Q must also be true. If we try to do anything else with this, it won't be valid or sound. Okay, let's move on to the second example I want to go over, modus tollens. It's another Latin term. So you'll see these MP, MT. In modus tollens, this is method of removing by taking away. Sometimes you'll hear this called denying the consequent. Okay, so it's another deductive argument form and a rule of inference. All right, so the form for this example is if P, then Q. So again, just like modus ponens, but then we say not Q. We know for certain that the conclusion, if P, then Q, is not true. When this happens, we can deduce that P is false, not P. Okay, what does this look like in a real-world example? Okay, they've got one down here. If the dog detects an intruder, then the dog will bark. Okay, so if P is the dog detecting an intruder, then Q is the dog will bark. Okay, if we know the dog did not bark, then we can deduce that there was no intruder detected by the dog. So we can deduce that the P component did not happen. If P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. Okay, so this is another good one we can use to see if an argument is valid. And of course, we need to look at the premises. You know, maybe the dog did bark and it wasn't recorded, or it didn't get caught on the security camera or something like that, or someone wasn't around to hear it. We don't know. So we have to figure out if all the claims are true, and then if all the claims can be put into a form that is consistent with a logical argument. Okay? So this is what we want to do. And these are the basic examples, let's see, that I wanted to cover here today. And let's see. Oh, The invalid forms of argument that are the opposition to this. So, for example, when I said, you can't assume that the driveway at the mansion is dry just because it didn't rain. These have names. The opposites of these formulas. Okay, affirming the consequent and denying the antecedent. So you can take a look at those and see how, you can figure out how this works. Okay, so for example, the opposite of our modus tollens argument here, if P then Q, not Q. So what if Q is true? Can we just sort of assume P? No, we can't, because we have to have the first part being true. If P, then Q. P being true, we can deduce Q. Like we said before, there can be different ways for the outcome to occur. If Q is true. If it's the driveway being wet and it's true, it could get wet a whole bunch of ways. The logical statement we've made doesn't explain how the driveway got wet. It could be rain, it could be someone with a hose, it could be an airplane dumping a bunch of water on it. I don't know. Anyway, these are the fundamental things you want to look for when reading people's claims or trying to figure out, how much information you need to figure out, which claims you need to figure out whether they're true or not, and then put them into a logical structure in which you can deduce the truth of something or not. And I've found this very helpful in life in all sorts of situations during my career. So hopefully it can help you too. And if you want to get into more details of all this, there are plenty of these links, like the links for affirming the consequent, denying the antecedent, and other things you can do to figure out about propositional logic, the history of it, Plato, Aristotle, philosophy, ethics, all that good stuff. I highly recommend spending some time reading up. It will make your writing better. It will make your reading comprehension better. It will make your arguments better. And it will make your conversations go better. So that's what I have for you guys today. Again, we went over modus tollens. We went over modus ponens. We went over the 3 fundamental laws of thought: identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. And the mooses are going to take us out. This is Bruce from Oregon. This has been the Bruce from Oregon Show, Management BKMs. Thank you for your time.